Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you happen to find yourself in the United States. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We are the community of graduate schools around the world that specialize in teaching international affairs and policy. And as part of our work to support that community of graduate schools, we have created a network for you, undergraduate and community college and student advisors all across the United States, to help make sure you have much more information about what a wonderful and dynamic place the fields of international affairs and public service are, and then to help you bring this message, bring this content to your students in a way that hopefully is an easy lift for you to share it with your community. We are kicking off this week with 3 amazing speakers, and I cannot wait for you to meet them and to learn more about them. Hopefully you've had a chance to see their bios in the program that you received. This is just the beginning though. We'll be talking tomorrow with graduate schools about how you can help your students put together a competitive application and pay for school. We'll be talking on Thursday with folks about how you can help students really tell their story, whether it's to a grad school, a fellowship program, or an employer. And on Friday, my team and I will be able to share with you a little bit more about what APSIA is, but also how the Public and International Service, the PISA family, can help you going forward. So we're so glad to have you here. We're so grateful to our speakers. And in particular, we're so grateful to my colleague, Brittany Chor, who arranged this whole event and this whole week to be of service to you and to your students. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to APSIA and Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota alum Liz Brailsford to kick us off. Liz, if you please.
Well, Carmen, thank you for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. And I have to reiterate that we're going to hear a lot of really excellent information today because I've seen the bios of our speakers. And so thank you to all of our speakers and thank you to APSIA for facilitating this excellent Zoom. And I hope all of you watching today have a really great APSIA spring workshop. We understand this is the kickoff of these next couple of days, and so we hope that this is really helpful for you. Really, the goal for today is to help you understand more about international and policy careers and those that might be interested in that. And so when you have a student that lands across your desk in your office and might not necessarily know exactly that they want to go in the direction of a policy or an international affairs career, we're hoping today will give you some information that will better equip you to advise that student down an avenue that may work better for them than what they may naturally be thinking that they should be doing or that they originally thought that they may want to do. So anyway, with that, we've got 3 great speakers. I went to the Humphrey School, the policy shop at the University of Minnesota, and got global affairs today. So I'm really excited to hear what we're about to talk about. So with that, I'd like to ask each of our speakers, tell us a little bit about the key points along your career journey. And did you know exactly that you wanted to go into policy and international affairs? And what was that tripping point, or what was that switch that made you realize you wanted to go into the direction? And I'd like all 3 of our speakers to speak to that. And any one of you can start.
I'm happy to be first of tribute. Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Strauss. Thank you so much for having me. The answer to that question is probably yes. I grew up in Houston, which is a very diverse megalopolis with 90 languages spoken. It's one of the most diverse cities in the country, maybe on the planet. So I was exposed to a lot of different people and cultures and languages and foods from a very young age. And I discovered very quickly that I really liked foreign language, and I was really interested in learning about other cultures and other people. And I really took that through high school. I learned Spanish. I taught myself Italian, and then I specifically chose to study international and global studies at Middlebury College, which focused on foreign language, a really strong foreign language program. And I studied abroad, I lived abroad, I worked abroad all through college, and as well as after I graduated, I lived in Japan, I lived in France, I lived in Spain, I worked for the Chilean government. So I really took that sort of very baseline experience as a very young person. And I think those initial years were really critical for discovering what you're passionate about and sort of taking those with you. And I never really stopped. I've worked in energy and migration, but always trying to fill some form of international or global experience into those, whether they're domestic or not. So I'm always trying to find ways to use my foreign languages. I speak 7 of them now, so I'm trying to continue to hone my skills, but it's something that I think I've known for a long time, and it's something that brings me a lot of joy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to dig in more if you have any additional questions.
Isabel or Kyle?
Sure, I can jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Isabel Sitcov. I'm based in New York City. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington. My current role, I work at C40 Cities, so it's an international NGO that focuses on climate change at the local level. So we work with 97 cities across the world to help accelerate climate action at the city level. Looking back at how I got to this point, so I originally, my undergraduate experience, I knew I wanted to do something, internationally focused. I initially was focused sort of on global food policy, and there were some pivotal abroad experiences that led me there. I studied abroad in Rome and did a policy program on urban food studies. So that was kind of what I thought the path I wanted to take. And then I had a couple of other international experiences similar to Zach that sort of shaped where I am today. So I lived abroad in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Italy, and then sort of got exposed to the climate change space and sort of found my home there and realized that I wanted to go back to graduate school to really formalize my international affairs expertise. So I went to Johns Hopkins School of International Affairs, a 2-year program. First year is in Bologna, so a lot of long nights studying with wine and pasta, so no complaints there. And then to Washington, D.C. for my second year. And I'd say that in terms of where I am today, working specifically in the local level climate change space, my graduate degree was pivotal in that. I took a couple of courses that really allowed me to get specific expertise in that area. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that experience. But yeah, and any other questions you might have. Thanks.
Kyle.
Hey everyone, my name is Kyle Ojima. I am currently with the Department of State. I'm from Colorado. I went to school at the University of Colorado and then graduate school at the University of Denver. And I would say, so I actually came to international relations kind of the same way that I think a lot of people have, which is that I actually started in school with a Japanese degree and then said, what can I add on to my Japanese degree that doesn't require to take too many classes? And it turned into an international relations degree, which then allowed me to kind of branch out, learn more about why I was so interested in this topic, and then keep going. And then after graduating from college, I spent a lot of time not working in the field, and then found a way to go back to grad school where I was looking at reasons I wanted to go back to grad school, and especially in Colorado, we're very focused on water. And so I was like, I want to go back to grad school. I want to look at international water relations. And then in grad school, realized that my field was so narrow, I'd never get a job in it. And then kind of just diversified out. And then from there, I actually went to Peace Corps. Usually people do Peace Corps before grad school instead of after. You can do it both. I think it actually helps to get the experience before you go to Peace Corps. But then in Peace Corps, I got even more experience working with foreign governments, working with our own government, and was able to transition out of Peace Corps and using something that's known as non-competitive eligibility, which is basically you can apply for roles that you don't have to compete as widely, so it's much easier to get into the US government. I was able to get into a role with Peace Corps and then into a role with the Department of State. So it's a little meandering on how I ended up where I am, but the goal was always going back to foreign policy, back to working on international relations. I currently work on a very specific topic within the US government, which is counter narcotics, which is very interesting, but not where I started. But it's like the skills I was gaining in Peace Corps and graduate school, even before I was like managing a restaurant, were things that I can still apply because they're all applicable even now.
Well, thank you. We've got some strong Japan connections on this because I lived in Japan myself for several years. And so love that. Love to hear that. You know, we all have this international connection, but there's so many policy degrees and policy avenues that advisors, you can advise your students on going down. They don't necessarily have to be the international route, of course. And hey, I meant to mention some housekeeping items. So I'm going to interject quickly. Turn on your cameras if you feel so inclined. Mute your mics if they're not. Ask questions in your in the Q&A. Actually, it's the chat box. We'll get to questions, and so put all your questions in if you have those. And then also, everyone briefly mentioned their bios, but it's also in your program, so you can check out all your speaker bios there for a fuller view. So sorry about that interjection, but anyway, back to the program. I want to ask each of you. You all seem to have more of an intentional path that I stumbled on international policy, frankly, in my career. But for all three of you, you seem to have a more intentional path on international affairs. Is there something in your career that you wish you had not done or that you had done differently that these advisors could use and equip themselves with information for what they can say to their own students?
I can go first. I think I suffer from a lot of imposter syndrome as a queer person. I think that's common. I think the one thing I would have not done is not doubted myself. You know, I applied to be an intern with the State Department, and I'm sure I applied with hundreds of other people, but I got it, right? I think you never know how you'll fare. And I think just telling yourself you're not qualified or telling yourself you're not capable, you never really know. Everyone's life experiences are applicable in different ways, and you have no idea if something you've done in the past is applicable to the job, to the person that's reading your resume. So I think the one thing I'll mention is not to doubt yourself or your skills or your background or any experiences you might have, because they could be applicable to what you're trying to do, and they could really help you plug into the career that you want, especially if it's in foreign policy.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, let's go on with tips.
Sure. Yeah, that rings true for me as well. I also applied to an internship with the State Department thinking I was applying to a black hole where it would just get lost in the ether, but I got it as well. So I think definitely I think students can take away that just put yourself out there and don't hold yourself back to any opportunities. There's been a couple of opportunities in my professional life where I sort of just hope for the best, sending out an application, it ended up working out. And I think you can't let sort of worries about not being accepted or competition kind of hinder you. I also think it's important to be like strategically stressed. I spent a lot of my time in graduate school being very stressed out, but in retrospect about the wrong things, stressing about economics tests that don't really help me so much in my day-to-day career, but I should have been more stressed about maybe building key relationships with professors that would benefit me today in my professional career. So I think that's something I would tell my previous self.
And it's actually funny, I also applied for Peace Corps, or it's not Peace Corps, I'm about to talk to it. I also applied for a Department of State internship with the exact same mindset and then got it. So I just keep applying. The other thing I would say is that I thought of graduate school and Peace Corps, both things that took 2 years. That's something that was going to take a very long time in my life. And I think I went to Peace, I started Peace Corps, not to make this a Peace Corps advertisement. I started Peace Corps when I was 30, which is pretty late for a lot of Peace Corps volunteers. And by the time I was 30, I was like, oh, okay, 2 years when I was 23 would have been nothing. That was 2 years I actually spent working at Target, I think. So I would recommend looking at these opportunities now as kind of things that are going to be a useful investment in your own future and ways that you can look at your own time, kind of the grand scheme of things, and just think about them in a longer term than just where you are in life at the exact moment you are.
Yeah, those are good tips. And we've talked about internships just now. And so I want to weave questions in and out of our conversation as they apply. And we've had a question that's just come through the chat box that There's a lot of worry about internships these days and pay and what's going on with current internships. What's been your experience with your own internships in this regard?
I'm happy to start. So the same internship I had just mentioned was unpaid until about very recently. The State Department did not pay its interns, particularly when they were abroad. And I was going to intern in Barcelona, which is not a cheap city to live in. So I do think depending on where you go to school, I went to Middlebury College. I was fortunate that the school had a center that provided students that did not make enough money or people who did not have support. They actually provided me with the grant of $3,000 to participate in that internship on behalf of the school. So I'm not sure if the universities at which you work provide that sort of those resources, but I would always direct students to those resources if they have to apply. If there's a grant, I would always encourage them to find even outside funding and sources. There's always different scholarships and grants from other private corporations as well to support students from different demographics. But I do know for a fact now that the White House, Congress, and the State Department and a lot of federal agencies are being held accountable, and they are now actually funding and paying internships. The one exception to that, I will tell you, is probably the United Nations does not and continues to not fund interns. So that is difficult considering you're likely based in Geneva or New York City, two of the most expensive cities on the planet. So that's where I would direct students that they do want to work at places like the UN, the OECD, any international organization where they may not pay interns, to look for those sources of internal or external funding, because they could really, really change your life.
Yeah. Anything to add?
I also did several unpaid internships, one with the State Department, and then one with a nonprofit. It hurts a lot. But unfortunately, the sort of inequities in kind of these institutions persist, but I had to, from a personal standpoint, I'd use my private loans to pay for it. I'm still paying them off. I think that that's something that maybe isn't spoken about enough in sort of the international affairs, international relations, academic circles. I know that I wasn't kind of given a lot of clarity about the realities of paying off student loans, making a nonprofit salary. I obviously knew that I wasn't going to make, private sector salary, but I think these conversations are really worth having on a frank level with your students if they're considering these careers. And yeah, I'm happy to speak more about my perspective on that as well.
Turning back to the advice that we had a comment from an attendee that says she advises her students and says they can get encouraged by the quote low acceptance rates, and she says applying anyway is the way. We have some agreement there with a couple of other comments and hearts. So one other tip, just apply. Okay, so that's good. Let's talk about your first job. I think we've had someone mention, but tell us your first job. What was it and how did you get it? I'm talking about a paid job after undergrad, after grad. What was that very first job and how did you get it? Kyle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so my first job out of graduate school, so I interned with Department of State, and if you intern with the state and a couple of other agencies, they will give you a clearance, which is extremely helpful in getting a job within the US government or with a contractor or with a consultancy. So it's something to consider. It's a nice added bonus. And I was able to turn that job into another job with Department of State, where I was actually in office management. What's the S stand for? Specialist, which is essentially a administrator. And so I wasn't exactly happy with the job. I did Peace Corps directly afterwards, so I left a paid position for an unpaid position to give you an idea of where my job satisfaction was. But just the ability to transition like something like a tangible clearance into a job within the Department of State, which for the most part requires a clearance of some degree, is something that's really helpful and something you should look at, especially because state internships are now paid. It's doubly helpful to consider.
What else were the very first jobs?
I'm happy to take the next stab at this. So after I graduated from Middlebury, I did actually two things. I'll mention both of them. One was I worked for the mayor of Houston and East Parker, who at the time was the first openly LGBTQ person ever elected to mayoral office in American history. So that was very exciting for me. And I worked in her international affairs office as an intern, and it was a Sister Cities program. And I just applied. I emailed them, asked them what their openings look like. And I told them I was from Houston, and it's also building like rapport with people who are running these programs. Is just reaching out and just saying, hey, I'm interested in this program. What is the timeline like? Like, what are you looking for? Can I have a call with you? Like, just putting yourself out there can really make a big difference. So that really worked out for me. And then I moved to Japan, and I actually worked for the JET program, or the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, which is the largest English teaching program on the planet. It's been around since 1975. It pays pretty well, and it's a pretty long process. You apply through, you like write an essay, you put out an application, you have an interview at a consulate and embassy, and then you are there for 1 to 5 years. I stayed there for a year due to unforeseen circumstances regarding an earthquake. But it was a really great experience. And it's really just, had never been to Asia. I had taught English before in the past, but I had never learned Japanese. I'd never been to Japan, but it was really about putting myself out there. And you'd be surprised with people. It's not really just about sometimes it's about your skills and not your experiences. Like, how can your skills be applied to a new experience versus how can your experiences be applied to a similar opportunity? So sometimes you have to see what your skills can do for new things.
You're on mute.
Thank you. For me, my first job out of undergrad was teaching English in Colombia. So I moved to Bogota without any job or connections, and was able to find a teaching job working in a university there, which was a really amazing experience, both for my own personal and professional growth living in a foreign country. I love doing that. I love kind of challenging myself in that way. And it was also really enlightening because I thought I wanted to go down sort of the education route, and I realized that wasn't for me. So I think, being a calculated risk taker and taking those risks, although it didn't pan out to be the career path I ended up with, it was really helpful for me to figure out what I didn't want to do. So that was a really useful experience. And then after graduate school, my first job was with C40. So that was like 3.5 years ago. I started as an intern. So I think that's worth noting that, I got a master's degree and my first job was an intern, but I kind of really had my eyes set on my organization. And it was a 6-month contract to get my foot in the door, which, I was privileged enough to take a low pay cut to do that. And I understand that not everyone can do that. And folks shouldn't necessarily have to do that in a city like New York, especially having student loans, etc. But in the end, it was worth it. So I think, unfortunately, sometimes that is the case, but it helped me kind of build connections and get to where I am within my organization today.
So let's fast forward a little bit. We've talked about your current jobs a bit, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about your current jobs. What do you do day to day? What is a current day to look like day to day? And then also I'm going to incorporate one of the questions that we have from the audience. What are some of the key skills that students need to follow the paths that you followed and in your current jobs? And anyone can kick it off.
I'm happy to go first again. So at the moment, for the past 1.5 years, roughly, I've worked at a small clean energy consultancy called Atlas Public Policy, and we work directly with states and private sector companies to help them deploy EV charging and electric vehicles, light duty and heavy duty vehicles, as well as how to electrify your buildings, how you get fossil fuels out of our building stock. Before I did that, I worked at the Atlantic Council, which is more pertinent to foreign affairs, which is a huge think tank here in DC, which focuses on global affairs. They have centers for everything. I was the director of their clean energy program for 3 years. Started actually as a program assistant, which was like 2 steps above intern. And then I really, after 3.5 years, became the director of the clean energy program. So it's really about really growing and adding to your experience. And in terms of the skills that you need, I hire people, and I've hired people for a number of years. And I always look for good communication skills, good writing. Writing is so critical working in foreign policy because you're always going to have to write some sort of memo, communicate things really clearly and synthetically. And really interpersonal skills, really critical, really being able to hold a conversation, engage people and meet people where they are. You know, I think the writing, communications, interpersonal skills, and I also say foreign language, depending on what you want to do. Those 4 things can be really critical. And I'll add one thing that's sort of unique is entrepreneurship, being able to like take an idea in your head, put rubber to the road and sort of create something and collaboratively with other people. I think I've done that a number of times in my career and it's really paid off, but really just taking an idea and catalyzing it into something real, I think is a really valuable skill.
I'll go ahead and jump in. So currently, right now, we're doing a lot of policy work with India. So I work on the counter-narcotics profile for the Department of State vis-a-vis our relationship with India. So it's working a lot on what are they doing with their own narcotics, how's narcotics affecting their country, how's their situation similar to ours, and where can we find similar pathways to work together. It's a lot of analysis, it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of writing and communication, but it's also a lot of programming because we fund programs within India, specifically around law enforcement reform and law enforcement training. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So a lot of programming and a lot of policy analysis. In terms of skills, I think that would be helpful. I think everything that Zachary said was spot on. I think that being a good writer is essential. There are roles where you don't need to be a good writer, but they're few and far between. If you're in a role that doesn't need a good writer and you're a good writer, they're going to like you better anyway. So I'd say be a good writer. Good communication skills, especially knowing when to ask for help. I think that very few people who start a position and then ask for help are going to be resented for asking for help. So I think people who take on a new role and then don't ask for help are actually more of a problem than people who ask too many questions. I think that's important to ask as many questions as you can and find people who are willing to answer them and work with you as you continue to grow. I think it's important to ask for criticism while you're working. Find the people who are going to be assessing what you're doing and then ask them how you can do it better, what went well, what didn't well, and then making sure you can synthesize the information they're giving you so that you don't ask the same thing twice. You can keep asking questions, but I think sometimes you don't want to make sure that when you ask those questions, you don't ask, how do I do this? You told me yesterday, how do I do this again? I think it's also important to be flexible. So a lot of entry-level roles are going to be things that you didn't think you're going to be doing. And they're just I describe my former position as a trash compactor. I did everything that everybody else didn't want to do. I got very good at those things. I still do some of them. They don't take me as much time. But it's important to be flexible because people are going to hand you things that you need to do, and you just won't know how to do them. You'll have to learn on the fly. And it's probably going to be an important thing that you don't even know how to realize it to fit into the entire system.
So my current role requires me to do a lot of policy analysis. So looking across cities within our network to see what sort of climate policies they're taking and how can we sort of amplify that. A ton of writing memos for mayors, coordinating events, which is not something that I necessarily thought I would be doing in my sort of international affairs role, but there is a bit of that, which is kind of interesting to learn about. Currently working on a podcast, so that's out on Spotify if you want to check that out, but writing copy for that and coordinating mayors to interview and city staff, so that's pretty cool. In terms of skills, I would echo everything that Kyle and Zach already said, and I would just add that specifically working at a nonprofit, there's always resource constraints with lack of funding, so you really just have to be adaptable and be able to take on that 20% of a role that no one can fill because you don't have funding for, and maybe it's not originally in your job description, but you sort of have to be flexible and adapt to that. And I think it goes a long way within the nonprofit space if you're willing to sort of step up and fill in that role, and that can kind of help you develop other skills and also, just be a good team player in general.
Something Isabel said jarred something in my mind. My experience is that in foreign policy, I've worked at embassies, I've worked at think tanks, I've worked with people across, different agencies is ego management, being able to engage with people who might think they are much more important than you, and being able to know how to engage with those sorts of personalities diplomatically. I guess diplomatic engagement is actually a really good skill, because you never know how that person might perceive you, or how you. I've been called Josh. I've been called different names that aren't even my own, right? So you really have to take and roll with the punches based on who you talk to. They might think you are totally insignificant, but there are ways to engage with those people that allow them to view you as with respect. And I think that's important, because you will inevitably engage with people who think they are far superior than you.
So we've talked about skills, and I'm going to ask another question about skills that is from our audience while we're on the topic. And it's, how should we advise first-year undergraduate students to make a case for the skills they bring to the table so that they can get started early on internships? Skills that they already have. I think that a lot of times younger people don't understand that they have a lot of transferable skills already. What's the case that these advisors can make? How can they advise them?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, because you often, when you're applying for jobs, it says 1 to 3 years of experience, and you don't have that experience. How do you get there? But I would say there are kind of creative ways you can do that, and never discount yourself if you don't have that or think you meet that requirement. For example, if there's a class that seems applicable to a job that you're applying to, use that and talk about what you learned in that class, and that can definitely count. I had a capstone project in my master's program that was focused on, energy efficiency in Medellin, Colombia. And I still talk about that in my current job. And it was, a 6-month class that I took, and it was a lot of project skills that I developed. So if there's, a class, I think that's one way to sort of gain that skill set. And also, if you can add on to additional coursework, like a volunteer experience, even if it's 1 to 2 hours a week of sort of, doing a writing, helping out an organization with writing or policy analysis, whatever it is, I think that can help as well.
Any other advising that they can do on skills they may already have?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, again, I hire a lot, and I have for a number of years, is lean into your lived experience as well, and some of your professional experiences you might think otherwise are insignificant. Maybe you worked at like a fishery, or maybe you worked at a grocery store, or maybe you worked, I don't know, at a summer camp, or any sort of job that you might think has no direct application to what you're doing. It likely does, because it's not about the experiences, it's about the skills. And that's exactly what someone just mentioned. So it could be interpersonal skills, intercultural skills, project management, it could be working with others, it could be collaboration. Those are all things you learn doing jobs, especially difficult jobs where you're working with people who maybe don't treat you super well. Maybe you're working at Starbucks, right? That job can be grueling, and that can be really difficult. And there's lots of skills you can extract from that you might not think are applicable. So I'd say, one, lean into your lived and professional experience, because things that you may even do at your home, maybe you take care of your brothers and sisters, maybe your parents worked, maybe you had to, go on and be super independent as a young person. Those are all experiences and stories that you should never discount, because they made you who you are, and they're really important to how you're going to grow as a person.
Thank you. Kyle, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think those are both excellently made points from both of them.
Okay, so we've talked about hard skills. Now let's talk about the type of person that's attractive. So if the three of you had to name 3 adjectives, and we'll just leave it at 3 adjectives of what kind of person, what is that person, what kind of adjective describes the person that's attractive to employers? What would those be? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they adaptable?
I have my 3.
Okay, 3.
I think one is engaged, and that could be on anything. And I would say engaged / passionate. You have to show that you care about the thing you're talking about. You kind of have to nerd out. You have to show that you are invested in it. The second is going to be resourceful, and that's sort of similar to adaptive. Like, what can you do with what you have? And how have you been able to build something from maybe you don't have that many resources, maybe you work at a nonprofit. What can you do with it? And the third, is diplomatic or like communicative. How can you manage, again, it's all about ego management. How can you manage the situation in the best way possible for the best possible outcome?
Okay, 3, okay. 3 from the other 2. Isabel, Kyle?
Those are also good. I will work on my other 2, but I will say passion is probably the base one. It sounds corny, but I think that everyone within my organization, the one through line is that everyone's hell-bent on leaving the world better than it was when they got there. And I think if you don't bring that kind of innate desire to do good, then I don't think it's going to be a great career for you personally, because you don't necessarily, I just think that's what a lot of folks in at least my specific part of international affairs get out of their career, is just knowing that they're making a positive impact. So that's really important.
Just to jump in, I'd say that for especially working where I work, it's really important. So the 3 words, I guess this is 4 words technically because one of them's hyphenated. Team player, somebody who's focused on learning and understanding or trying to continuously improve themselves, and then somebody who, just to borrow Zach's, communicative or diplomatic, somebody who's telling people when they need help or when they can help others or what's going on. One of the big problems we have in our organization is that people sometimes don't tell other people what they're doing. And then we either double up work, we don't know what they're doing, and they're behind. You just got to tell people what you're doing. It's there's no reason to hide. If you're on the same team, don't tell. There's no reason to hide what you're doing. So those are mine.
What are the hidden things that quote unquote everybody knows to do to get ahead? And how did you learn them?
I can start this one. I think that it sounds like, I think we've all talked about it. We've all, except for maybe Isabel, have moved a lot of jobs within our field. But she also had a number of internships. I can let her talk to her own experience. But from my experience, a lot of the people I work with, a lot of my friends who are in the field, they move jobs very frequently and they're willing to be flexible. They look at their own jobs. Is the skill set that am I going to gain the skill set I need to go towards my career in this job? If not, I'm going to start looking somewhere else. And I think that a lot of roles can shift over time, and a lot of roles can grow with you, and sometimes they grow with you and sometimes you grow apart, and it's important to know when to jump ship and when to find a new position. And the other piece I had was I think that networking, as much as I hate it, is actually very important. It's the bane of my existence. I'm terrible at it, but it does help you get positions. It helps you know what you're walking into. Informational interviews are really important just to understand what the job is and who to talk to, and what skill sets you need to even start applying. So I'd say those are my 2.
Yeah, I'd say networking and building interpersonal skills is really important, and building key relationships, just showing up for your coworkers and networking with like-minded individuals in different organizations is really important, because you just never know when you're going to be looking for that next role. And so it's important to sort of just always sort of building relationships, whether it's sort of intentional or not. That goes a long way to sort of building a long career, I think. I mean, speaking from someone who has a short career so far, but I think that that's really important.
And I'll just piggyback on those 2 things because I hated LinkedIn when I was like 25. I resisted it for so long. And then I moved to the US and I started in think tanks and working with government and, all these different kinds of people. And I discovered that you really have to just be unabashed. You have to be a little bit shameless. I'll even use the word shameless in the way that you communicate with people when you're looking for jobs. You cannot have any shame when you ask people for help. Email people, ask them if they want to have a coffee, ask them if they have a time for a phone call. The only thing they're going to tell you is no, right? That's the one thing you have to realize is the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no. The best things that happen, you're going to have a great conversation. You're going to give them your resume And I think the best story I'll mention about this is I was on a bus, I rode the bus every day, the 63 bus here in Washington, D.C., and there was this guy that I saw every day on the bus. And he said, okay. And then I looked at the job I wanted to apply for, and this dude was the same dude I saw on the bus every day. And so I emailed him. I was like, hey, I see you on the bus every day. I want to apply for this job. Can we get a coffee? And I did. And then I gave him my resume. We had a good conversation, and I got an interview, and then I got a job, right? It's really just about putting yourself in positions where you can communicate with people in the ways that will move you forward, but in ways that are genuine. So I think one pitfall is when people network is they look just like they're trying to extract from other people. And that doesn't come across very palatably. It's really about how do you form connections and with like genuinely, how does it feel like you're going to give and receive? It's more of a two-way street. A lot of networking tends to be extractive, and I would tell people to steer away from that form of engagement.
Authentic connection, authentic engagement. And I would dare say that in DC, people are expecting you to write them for coffee. They're expecting you to ask for meetings and things like that. It's the way it works there. So I want to go back to a question that someone asked earlier in our session. And I think it's really important in today's time. And it's something that we talk here about at the council a lot. Polarization. Politics. It's harder in our country maybe than ever before in terms of that. And so this person says, is there any guidance about the partisan politics as they impact international policy jobs and job searching in this area? And this person is thinking the fluctuations in support and changing of missions must be a large impact on government and international policy roles. How do we maneuver this impossible situation?
So I have three thoughts, but I'll defer to Isabel or Kyle if they would like to go first. I'm happy to. Isabel? Oh. So I worked at a nonpartisan think tank for 3 years, one that was run by a Republican, a moderate Republican, but whose staff was majority Democrat or majority liberal. I worked in clean energy at a time during the Trump administration that was seeing a lot of flux. But the one thing I'll mention about polarization is places like DC, and especially under clean energy, which is ostensibly more of a democratically liberal thought, but over time has really gained support from the right, is that a broken clock is right twice a day. So even if one subject isn't fully, aligned with your values, things like nuclear energy, geothermal energy, energy efficiency, those things are attractive to Republicans. They're attractive to people on the right. And even if you aren't aligned with them completely, you're going to find some form of common ground. It exists. It exists, even if you don't think it does. I used to work with a lot of veterans in clean energy, and veterans' communicative talking piece or a communicative demographic was really effective. And veterans tend to be more Republican or more right-leaning, but there are a lot of veterans who were very invested in clean energy. So it's really finding common ground. It does exist. One caveat to that is I think you should always find a job that aligns with your values. If it does not align with your values, you're probably not going to be happy there, and you probably will not feel like you won't be fulfilled, and you might not feel as safe as you might in any job. So I'd say if you can find the common ground, it exists, and take advantage of it. But above all else, find a job that aligns with your values.
I can follow up on that. Specifically with the Department of State, because we work under the, I can't remember the exact term right now, we work under the auspices of the president. It can definitely be polarizing when the administration changes, but at the same time, a lot of the mission stays the same. So at least within the state, the funding may decrease or increase depending on the administration, but the goals of the administration itself, or the goals within state, tend to align pretty tightly with what we're doing. It can be a little bit different, especially because I work in counter-narcotics. We work a lot with law enforcement, a lot with different branches of Department of Justice and other branches that tend to be more conservative in the state. And I think that for us, it tends to be we're all working towards the same goal, no matter how much we agree or disagree with it, which is U.S. foreign policy. So under kind of the broader umbrella of we tend to work together pretty well, even when we disagree on the politics. Like, for example, I worked with this guy who lived in West Virginia, had a gun bunker. Awesome guy. He he was great to work with. I liked working with him. We disagreed on everything on politics, and we got along as people because we both did the work we were supposed to be doing and respected each other and were able to get along. I think there are potentially breaking points on that, but I think that as long as you can treat each other as humans, for the most part, you're going to find more things in common than not.
Yeah, that's a tough one. When I did my internship at the State Department, I was at the US Embassy in Mexico City. It was an interesting time in 2017 to be in Mexico when there was, certain policies taken by the United States that were affecting Mexican citizens. So I had a lot of, kind of restless nights about what I was doing there and my impact, but I, spoke with a lot of colleagues there and kind of gleaned from them what their experience was like working under an administration that maybe they didn't disagree with. And their kind of response was like, well, you still need like good people in government doing good policy, doing good work, kind of holding people in power accountable, but also kind of like keeping the ship moving. So I did feel good about the work I was doing on the ground. And so I think back to what Zach said about sort of having your values aligned with what you're doing is really important. And I think what I'm working on now, which is climate policy, which is polarizing in the United States specifically. But I think focusing on the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve in my sector is really important. So it's about creating sustainable, livable cities for people where they can thrive. That's the outcome. And that's kind of what you try to focus on when sort of the topic area can be polarizing. And then I think you can sort of find a way forward in kind of, polarizing environments.
We have another question from the audience, and it says, were you involved in any research opportunities in the field while you were an undergrad? I know, Isabel, you mentioned a capstone. I think that's applicable.
Yeah, I did a capstone in my master's program, which was a requirement. So you get partnered with an organization and you're kind of serving as a graduate consultant to them. So that was a really useful experience. And it gave me a lot of kind of project management skills, working with a team, consulting with a client that I could use in my interviews after my graduate program. And then another pivotal research experience was in my undergrad. I applied another experience where I didn't think that I would get it, but I sort of cold applied to this program in Italy where I did a research fellowship for a month. And that was a really cool experience as well. So apply.
So I'm going to ask one last question, and I think it's a perfect question to end us with. And then after that, stay tuned because we have just a couple of important announcements. But one is, the last question is, and it comes from the audience, what should students be asking you in an informational interview?
I'm happy to answer that because I get asked to do them often. I want someone who's coming to me with a knowledge of what we do at the, well, it depends if they're looking for a job or looking to just learn. I think they need to sort of know what they want to accomplish. Like what is their goal? What are they passionate about? What drives them? So I can help direct them. I often have to ask like follow-up questions to sort of solicit that from people who maybe aren't as sure. But if they're looking for a position at my company, or if they're looking for a position at my organization, I want them to sort of know what we do and sort of understand. I want them to ask questions about how their experiences could apply to the role and how the role maybe could apply to them. So I want them to come with a basic knowledge base about who I am, who they are, and what we're trying to do together. Sort of the three things.
What other questions?
Yeah, I'd agree. Definitely coming with a bit of research about sort of what creep on them on LinkedIn definitely is a must. And yeah, having a bit of understanding about what their organization is and what they do. And then I think follow-up is so important. I've had so many, both been on the receiving end and then also been the person asking for the informational interview. And a lot of times I don't get any follow-up, and that's completely fine. And hopefully that was useful for that person. But I'm more than happy to continue to help that person if we chat once. So I would definitely encourage students to follow up, ask, check in 6 months. Are there any positions? I've seen this, etc. Just continue to build that relationship, I think.
Just on the point of being passionate about or understanding the organization, I was interviewing somebody once, and this was when I was at Peace Corps, and I was like, why do you want to work with us at the Peace Corps? And they said, well, I really like peace. I'm glad you're not like spreading guns around. I was like, you don't know what we do. You've never heard of our organization. It was like, it was a very strange experience. So it's good to do your background research. I would also say it's like, in terms of what students should be asking, I think it's helpful to kind of understand the skills you already have. This is something advisors can work with you on, so that when you come, you can think of questions that be like, I did X, Y, and Z. Would this be relevant to this organization? If not, what kind of skills can I be gaining to help me, or where can I build on the skills I already have? So I think that kind of having some self-awareness of what you are already doing is helpful when you come to speak to other people, so that you can kind of gauge where you're at and what you can, where there is room to grow.
I think that's great. And because we have a couple of minutes, I'm going to say a couple of things also. Come prepared. Be on time, be a couple minutes early, bring a business card. If you don't have a business card, bring a personal card with your contact information, bring a notepad or a portfolio and a pen with some things and thoughts and maybe some questions already written down so you look like you're prepared. Lean forward, look them in the eyes, smile a little bit. Be engaged in the conversation. I think asking about their path is really helpful because everyone's on a very different path. And when you ask about a path, it allows people to understand that they don't have to be on this very regimented societal path that we say you must follow to succeed in America. My path, my career has been very linear, and I think I'm doing all right. And I want people to understand that they can follow a non-linear path and succeed. So I think that's really important. And then I want to reiterate the follow-up point. Always advise your students to send a thank you within 24 hours. Email it. It's so easy. It's so short. Maybe reiterate your interest in what you want to do. And if there were questions that your person said they would follow up on, repeat that in the email to them, because the people that you're interviewing are really busy and they may not remember what they promised to do. So put it in an email again to remind them gently and kindly. Follow up on that in 24 hours. And then, like Isabel said, be sure to stay in touch and don't waste that opportunity. And then one last thing I would say is always ask for 2 more people that they can connect you with. I would always try, when I was in my job searching days, try to get 2 people out of every informational interview. And that just continued my networking path, which is really important. I would have to agree. And on that note, I'm so excited that you are having your spring workshops. I want to be sure that you know about tomorrow's. It's tomorrow, Wednesday, the 8th. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern on Zoom, and that is comparing graduate degrees and mapping financial aid. We'll see you there. And then before we go, we have a really brief Zoom evaluation poll, and APSIA staff is going to put that up right now. If you don't mind just taking a minute or 2 to take this poll, we would appreciate it. I want to thank the speakers again. Thank you to APSIA for hosting us, and we hope you were able to learn some things, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Liz and Isabel and Zach and Kyle, for all of your great wisdom, and thanks to our attendees. Please do let us know in the poll about you and about what you thought of our session, and we cannot wait to see you tomorrow and throughout your journey in the Public and International Service Advisor Network. Thanks again to our speakers and our attendees. We will have this recording up on APSIA's YouTube page as soon as technology lets me get it there. And we look forward to seeing you at other APSIA events. See you tomorrow.